The Canada Pension Plan deposited $1,083 into my account on the last Friday of every month. I know because I checked the balance every morning that first winter, the way you check on something fragile, hoping it hadn't changed overnight. It always had. Hydro. Grocery runs. The property tax installment I hadn't budgeted for because my husband had always handled those things. After 38 years of marriage, I discovered I didn't know the password to the online banking account. I didn't know where he kept the car registration. I didn't know, until the lawyer told me at the reading of the will, that the mortgage had 6 years left on it. Gerald died in February. By April, I was back at work. I was 64 years old and I hadn't held a paying job since I'd taken early retirement from the Hamilton-Wentworth District School Board 3 years prior. I'd been a school secretary for 26 years at an elementary school on the mountain, the kind of job where you know every child's name, every parent's voice on the phone, every teacher's coffee order. When the board restructured and offered a buyout package to staff over 60, Gerald and I sat down at the kitchen table with a calculator and decided it made sense. We had plans. Portugal in the fall, winters in Florida if the arthritis got bad enough. Grandchildren that our daughter kept promising were coming eventually. Gerald's heart gave out on a Tuesday morning while he was clearing snow from the back steps. He'd been out there 20 minutes. I was still in my housecoat reading the Hamilton Spectator. So there I was, 64 years old in a 3-bedroom house on Concession Street, with a pension that didn't quite cover the bills and savings I was terrified to touch. My daughter called every Sunday from Vancouver. She offered to fly home. I told her not to. I told her I was fine. I told her that so many times I almost started believing it. The job at the Westdale Community Health Center came through a neighbor who volunteered there on weekends. They needed an evening administrative assistant 3 nights a week, Tuesday through Thursday, handling patient intake records, insurance paperwork, appointment scheduling. The pay was modest but steady. The shift ran from 4 in the afternoon until 9 at night, which meant I could take the bus both ways, which meant I didn't have to worry about parking or driving in the dark, which at my age had started to feel like more of a negotiation than it used to. That's how I met the security guard. His name was Desmond, and he was 57 years old with a weathered face that made him look older, and eyes that once you got past the tired surface were sharper than almost anyone I'd ever met. He worked the evening to overnight shift at the health center, 4 nights a week, sitting at the front desk after the building locked to the public at 8, doing rounds every hour through the corridors and stairwells. He'd been doing it for 2 years, having landed the contract through a private security company after the paper mill, where he'd spent 22 years, closed its Brantford operation, and moved production to Georgia. The first time I really noticed him, was a Thursday in May. I was leaving late, past 9, because a patient file system had crashed, and I'd stayed to help the IT coordinator run a manual log before she could go home. The lobby was mostly dark by then, just the desk lamp and the emergency exit signs, casting everything in that slightly eerie institutional glow. Desmond was sitting behind the front desk with a paperback novel open and a look on his face like a man who had long ago made peace with quiet evenings. "Cold out there tonight," I said, pulling my coat on. He looked up, and something about his expression told me he wasn't used to being spoken to on his way out. "Getting colder," he said. "You parked or busing it?" "Bus. Mountain West. Last one's at 10, so I've got time." He nodded and went back to his book. I went out into the April chill and thought nothing more of it. But I kept working Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and Desmond kept working his shift. And somewhere in those first weeks, a pattern started forming the way patterns do when 2 people occupy the same space at the same hours, night after night. A nod hello. A brief comment about the weather, the news, the slow elevators in the East Wing, nothing remarkable. Just 2 people being decent to each other in a place where most people had somewhere else to be. In June, I started bringing an extra coffee. It wasn't planned. I'd stopped at the Tim Hortons on King Street before my shift, double for myself, and on some impulse I can't entirely explain, I ordered a second one, black, the way the staff there had once told me older men usually take it. I set it on the front desk without saying anything grand about it. "Didn't know how you took it," I said. "I went with black." He stared at it for a moment like he was trying to figure out what the catch was. "Black's perfect," he said. "Thank you." I told him it was nothing and went up to my office on the 2nd floor. After that, it became a Tuesday and Thursday thing. Wednesday, I didn't pass a Tim Hortons on my route. I'd set the cup on the desk, he'd say, "Thank you," I'd say, "You're welcome," and that would be all. But gradually, over the weeks, the exchange stretched. He started walking me to the bus stop on King Street, just to the corner, just until my bus appeared at the end of the block. At first I thought it was simple politeness, then I thought it was protocol. Eventually I understood it was something else, though I couldn't have said exactly what. We talked during those short walks. He told me about the paper mill, about the kind of work that pulls into your bones so completely you don't realize until it's gone how much of your identity had been packed into it. I told him about the school, about the children whose university graduation photos still showed up in my Facebook feed sometimes, about the particular grief of leaving a place where you'd mattered before you were ready to stop mattering. He had a daughter in Guelph, he said, 31, worked at a veterinary clinic, didn't call much. We'd had a falling out, he said, not elaborating, and I didn't push. By September, I'd switched from Tim Hortons to a travel thermos. Homemade coffee, the good stuff I bought at the small roaster on Lock Street. There was something that felt more honest about it, less transactional. He'd hold it in both hands during our walks, like a man who'd forgotten what it felt like to have something warm offered to him without conditions. "You didn't have to do this every time," he said one October evening. "I know," I said, "but the walk back is colder without someone to talk to, so really, I'm being selfish." He smiled then, a real one, the kind that rearranged his whole face. "I stored it away the way you store the first warmth of spring." By November, I knew about the mill shutdown and the severance that had run out faster than expected, and the apartment on Barton Street East that was affordable but depressing, and the back that gave him trouble in the cold, and the audiobooks he'd gotten into because his eyes strained under the desk lamp for too long. He knew about Gerald, about the house on Concession Street that echoed in ways a house shouldn't, about my daughter in Vancouver who sent care packages at Christmas and called every Sunday and still didn't quite know what to do with a mother who insisted she was fine. He knew about the filing system at the health center that I was starting to notice odd things about. Small things. Discrepancies in patient records that didn't match the Ontario drug benefit claims attached to them. I mentioned it offhandedly one November evening on our walk to the stop. "Probably just a data migration error," I said. "We switched systems in August. Things get scrambled." He said nothing, just nodded. I forgot I'd mentioned it. December arrived with that particular Canadian cold that settles into the city like it plans to stay until April and means it. I switched the thermos to hot chocolate on Tuesdays, which seemed to surprise him every time, even though I did it every week. I'd taped a candy cane to the lid the first Tuesday of December, and he'd laughed, a short, real sound, and shook his head slowly. "My ex-wife used to do things like that," he said. "Little touches. I never really appreciated it until I didn't have it anymore." "I think that's how most people work," I said. "We're better at missing things than noticing them." He was quiet after that, in a way that felt like he was turning something over. It was a Wednesday in mid-December when everything changed. The filing discrepancy I'd mentioned in November had not gone away. If anything, it had grown. My supervisor, a careful, organized woman named Pauline, who had been with the health center for 15 years, had pulled me aside that afternoon. She'd been cross-referencing patient intake records against ODB claim submissions for the past 3 weeks. There were gaps. Medications listed as dispensed to patients who had no record of being seen on those dates. Claims submitted under locum physician codes that didn't correspond to any locum who'd actually worked that month. Not massive amounts individually, but added together, structured carefully enough that only someone who knew both the intake system and the billing system would spot it. We were looking at something significant. "We're going to have to report this to the ministry," Pauline said quietly. "But I want to finish the internal review first. I don't want to make an accusation that we can't back up completely." "Of course," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "You've been the one pulling most of these records," she said. "I want you to know that I'm being careful about who I talk to about this." I understood what she meant without her saying it plainly. Someone inside the building was doing this. Someone who had access to both systems, who knew the rhythms of the place well enough to insert false records without triggering automatic flags. Someone who knew when the building was quiet. I went downstairs at 8:50, 5 minutes before my usual departure. I was distracted, my mind still on the numbers, the codes, the paper trail that didn't quite add up. Desmond was at the desk. He looked up when I came around the corner, and something in his expression shifted, sharpened, in a way I hadn't seen before. "Can I walk with you tonight?" he said. "You always walk with me," I said. "I mean somewhere other than the bus stop. Can we sit somewhere and talk? There's a Tim Hortons on James Street, 5 minutes. I'll drive you to your stop after." I looked at him. My coat was half on and my bag was over one shoulder, and there was something in the steadiness of his voice that told me this was not small talk. "All right," I said. He signed out with the overnight guard who came in at 9, a younger man I'd never spoken to. We walked to his car, a 10-year-old Civic with a crack in the passenger side mirror. He drove us to the Tim Hortons on James North, and we sat in a corner booth, 2 coffees between us, and he put both hands flat on the table like a man steadying himself before a difficult thing. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to know that I've been thinking about whether to tell you for 2 weeks now. I'm telling you because I've decided the risk of not telling you is worse than the risk of being wrong." I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with December. "All right," I said. He told me about a man he'd seen 3 times in the past month in the stairwell of the East Wing after 8 o'clock, when the building was locked to the public. Medium height, early 40s, the kind of face you'd forget, always wearing the clinic's maintenance coverall with the ID badge turned backward. The first time, Desmond had asked for his ID, and the man had produced it without fuss, said he'd been called in for a plumbing issue on the 3rd floor, sounded perfectly reasonable. Desmond had walked him out at 9:15 and thought nothing more of it. The second time, he'd logged it. No call to maintenance had been made that night. He checked the work order system the following morning through the security company's building access portal. Nothing scheduled. The third time had been last Tuesday. He'd been at his desk doing rounds paperwork when he'd heard a door close upstairs, footsteps in the stairwell. He hadn't gone up immediately, just sat quietly, the way he'd learned to do. 3 minutes later, the man came through the lobby toward the side exit. Desmond said hello. The man nodded without stopping. Just before he pushed through the door, his phone rang, and he answered it and said, clear as anything in the empty lobby, "Not yet. She's still pulling records, but she doesn't know what she's looking at. I'll handle it this week." I sat very still in the Tim Hortons booth. "She," I said. He nodded. "Did he say my name?" "Not your name. But you're the one pulling records, aren't you? You mentioned it to me in November." "I am," I said. "Pauline and I both are, but I've been doing most of the physical file retrieval." He pulled out his phone. He'd logged the dates and times of all 3 incidents in a notes application. He'd noted the man's description each time. He'd photographed the maintenance log on his 3rd visit, confirming no work order existed for that date. He showed me all of it, turning the phone so I could read. "I started doing this after the 2nd visit," he said. "I didn't know what it meant then. I do now. Or I think I do." My hands around my coffee cup were not steady. "There's more," Desmond said. "And this is the part I should have told you sooner, but I kept hoping I was wrong. Last Thursday, I went out to my car at the end of my shift, and I sat there for a few minutes. I could see the front of the building. His truck was parked across the street, engine running, lights off. He sat there for 22 minutes. I timed it. He was watching the entrance. He was watching for me," I said, "to see when I leave." Desmond didn't answer, which was an answer. "I need you to not go to your house tonight," he said. "Not until we've talked to the police." I thought of my house on Concession Street, the spare key I kept under the back planter, the habit I had, even in winter, of leaving the kitchen window cracked a finger's width because the house ran warm. All the small, careless habits of a woman who had lived alone long enough to stop being frightened of it. "How do I know this isn't?" I started, and stopped, because even as I began the sentence, I knew it was the wrong one. I knew it the moment I looked at Desmond's face. This was not a man telling me a story. This was a man who had weighed something carefully and made a decision he was not comfortable with, because he'd decided it was right. "I know," he said quietly. "I know how it sounds. I'm asking you to trust me." I thought about the months of Tuesday and Thursday coffees, of the walks to the stop, of the things we'd said to each other in the dark outside the health center while the King Street buses groaned past. I thought about the way he'd laughed at the candy cane on the lid of the thermos, the real laugh, the one that didn't perform anything. "Where can we go?" I said. He drove us to the Hamilton Police Service station on King William. It was 10:30 at night, and the front desk officer looked at us with the particular patience of someone accustomed to receiving unusual things at unusual hours. Desmond explained calmly and clearly, in precise language, what he'd observed and when. He showed the officer his phone log. He showed the photograph of the maintenance system, confirming no work order. They took us to a back room. A detective came in after 15 minutes, a woman in her late 40s with reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on. She sat across the table and listened to everything Desmond said a second time, and then she listened to me explain the ODB discrepancies, the mismatched records, the locum codes that didn't correspond to anyone who'd actually worked those dates. "How long has this been going on?" the detective asked. "Based on what Pauline and I have found so far, at minimum 18 months, I said. Possibly longer. We haven't finished the full review." She wrote something down. "And the man you've seen in the building after hours," she said to Desmond. "You'd be able to identify him?" "Yes." She slid a photograph across the table, printed on plain paper, a staff directory image. It was a face I recognized without knowing why I recognized it. The face you don't notice precisely because it's never given you reason to. "He works in health records," I said slowly. "He pulls physical files for the physician team. He has access to both systems, patient intake and billing." The detective nodded like this confirmed something she'd already begun to think. His name was attached to a filing complaint that had been lodged 6 weeks earlier by a patient in Stony Creek. A claim had been submitted to the Ontario Drug Benefit Program for a medication she'd never received under a prescription that bore her physician's code but had never been written. The patient, who happened to be the sort of thorough, organized person who kept meticulous health records, had noticed. She had called the ministry. The complaint had been forwarded to the health center. It had been, apparently, assigned to the records department for review. "To him," the detective said. "It was assigned to him to review." I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the December outside. "He would have known, then," I said. "When the internal audit started, he would have seen the file request logs. He would have seen my name pulling records." "Yes," the detective said. "He would have." There was a silence in the room. The younger officer who'd been sitting in the corner made a note. "You're safe right now," the detective said, "but we'd prefer you not return home tonight. We're going to need to move quickly on this. If he's been watching your building access patterns, he may already know your shift ended an hour ago." "Is there somewhere you can stay?" Desmond asked me. There was. A friend from the school board days, retired now, who lived on the West Mountain and who had been asking me for months to come for dinner and stay over. I texted her from the police station. She called back in 90 seconds. "Come now," she said. "Come right now. I'll put the kettle on." I stayed for 2 nights. I didn't sleep much either of them, lying in my friend's spare bedroom listening to the sounds of a different house and thinking about the filing cabinet on the second floor of the health center, about the mismatched codes I'd been working through for 3 weeks, without once thinking I might be standing too close to something dangerous. The detective called on the second morning. "We executed a search warrant last night," she said, "for his home and vehicle. He's been collecting patient files for at least 2 years. Paper records, which he'd remove from the building a few at a time, photograph, and use to submit fraudulent ODB claims through a spoofed provider account. We found approximately 240 files in his apartment, plus a laptop with the spoofed billing accounts and a record of claim submissions totaling just over $300,000. $300,000, I repeated. "Over 26 months, she said. He was careful. Small amounts per claim, different patient files each month, rotating physician codes. The kind of pattern that doesn't trigger automatic flags unless someone is doing a full manual cross-reference, which you were. He's been charged," the detective continued, "with fraud over $5,000 against the provincial government, unauthorized use of computer systems, criminal harassment, and attempted break-and-enter. The attempted break-and-enter charge is based on security footage from the side entrance that we pulled overnight. He used a swipe card to enter the building on 2 occasions that weren't logged in the official access system, meaning he'd cloned an authorized card at some point. On the last occasion, he went directly to the second-floor administrative office and attempted to access the filing cabinet where the records under review were stored. He didn't get in. The lock had been changed when the audit started, but he didn't know that. I sat down on my friend's living room couch. He hadn't been watching me because he knew I'd figured it out, I realized. He'd been watching me because he was afraid I was about to. There's a difference, and for some reason that distinction mattered to me. I want to tell you, the detective said before she hung up, that the records your colleague Pauline submitted as part of the internal audit were critical. So were the logs kept by the security officer. His documentation was meticulous. In my experience, that kind of record-keeping from a witness is unusual. It made a significant difference to the speed of this. I went back to work the following Tuesday. Pauline embraced me in the hallway, which she was not generally a demonstrative person, which told me how she felt about the whole thing more than words would have. Desmond was at the front desk when I came through the lobby, as he always was. I set the thermos on the desk. He looked at it, and then at me, and didn't say anything for a moment. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You don't owe me anything." "I'd like to give one anyway," he said. We sat in the small family waiting room off the lobby, which was empty at 4 in the afternoon. He held the thermos in both hands. His son had been 23, he said. Had been. Those 2 words doing all the work. He'd been living in Brantford, working a warehouse job, and he'd started using. Desmond had noticed. He'd noticed the way a father notices things he doesn't want to see clearly, which is to say he saw them and told himself another story. He told himself his son was going through a rough patch. He told himself his son was old enough to make his own choices. He told himself the signs he was reading were probably something else. One night, his son called him from a parking lot and said he was scared and didn't know what to do. Desmond told him to go home and sleep it off. He was tired. He had work at 6 the next morning. His son was found 2 days later. I didn't say I was sorry. It seemed too small a thing. After that, Desmond said, his voice even and careful, I paid attention to everything. To the way people talked to each other in the break room, to shift changes that didn't line up, to a car parked outside for 20 minutes in the middle of the night, to a man in a maintenance uniform who showed up 3 times without a work order, to a woman who mentioned discrepancies in records in a tone that suggested she'd almost talked herself out of worrying about it. He looked at me. I don't tell you this, so you'll feel responsible, he said. I tell you because you asked me once why I took so many notes, why I logged everything. That's why. You were paying attention, I said. I wasn't, once. I'm trying to make up for it in whatever small ways I can. I reached across and put my hand on his briefly, the way I might have with an old friend. You made up for something much larger than whatever you think you owe, I said. You need to know that. He nodded and looked at the thermos. Good coffee this week, he said. I smiled. It's from the Lock Street place. New batch. The trial took 8 months. I testified twice, once at a preliminary hearing and once at trial. Desmond testified as well, presenting his logs and photographs with the same precise calm he brought to everything. The Crown prosecutors had told us privately that his documentation had made their work substantially easier. The defendant pleaded not guilty and then, midway through the trial, changed to guilty on 3 of 5 charges after the evidence against him proved comprehensive. He was sentenced to 4 years, with restitution ordered to the Ministry of Health totaling the full amount defrauded. In the hallway outside the courthouse after the sentencing, Desmond and I stood in the January cold waiting for my ride. Is it enough? I asked him. The sentence. He thought about it honestly. It's something, he said finally. It's more than I expected from the system, if I'm telling the truth. And the patients get their files back, which matters. It matters, I agreed. We'd gotten into the habit, somewhere in those 8 months, of having dinner on Friday evenings. Nothing elaborate, his place or mine, depending on the week. He made a very good butter chicken, which had surprised me enough that I'd told him so, and he'd smiled the real smile. I made a chicken pot pie that he'd asked for twice more since the first time. We watched the news and argued about the senators, which neither of us cared about passionately enough for it to be a real argument, and talked about his daughter in Guelph and my daughter in Vancouver, and the particular loneliness of children who live in different cities and love you imperfectly from far away. His daughter called in March. She'd heard about the case through someone who knew the security company he worked for. His name had been in a Hamilton Spectator piece about the conviction, a small piece on an inside page, but enough for her to search. She'd read the whole article twice, he told me. She said she'd been thinking about the falling out, he said over dinner the Friday after. She said she'd been thinking about it for a long time, actually. And that reading about what I'd done, not because it was dramatic, but just because I was paying attention, and I wrote things down and I showed up when it mattered, she said it reminded her of who I was before everything fell apart, who I was trying to be. He set down his fork. She's coming for Easter, he said, and she's bringing my grandson. He's 2. I've only seen pictures. I got up from my chair and hugged him, which was not something I generally did without warning. He stood still for a moment like someone recalibrating, and then hugged me back. On Easter Sunday, I went to his daughter's house in Guelph with a butter tart from the Lock Street Bakery and a coloring book for a 2-year-old I'd never met. Desmond's daughter was quiet and careful, and looked at her father with an expression I recognized because I'd worn it myself, the expression of someone still deciding how much room to make. The little one climbed into my lap at one point, entirely without invitation, and tried to pull the button off my cardigan. "Careful," she said to her son, surprised. "He's fine," I said. "I used to have all the buttons pulled off at work anyway." She looked at me for a moment. "He talks about you," she said. "I hope good things," I said. "He said you were the first person in a long time who made him feel like more than a function." I thought about the front desk, and the low light and 2 coffees in December and the walk to the bus stop in October dark. "He did the same for me," I said. "That's the whole story, really. I am 65 now. I still work 3 evenings a week at the Westdale Community Health Center, still take the bus up the mountain on Tuesdays and Thursdays, still stop at the Tim Hortons on King Street. Desmond's daughter and her little boy drove into Hamilton 3 weekends ago, and I made the pot pie, and the 4 of us sat at my kitchen table and talked until past 8, which for a 2-year-old is an impressive achievement. My own daughter is coming home for Thanksgiving. She mentioned for the first time that she and her partner have been having conversations about the future, about what they might want. I didn't say anything except that whatever they decided, she should tell me soon enough to rearrange the guest room. There is a new administrative assistant in Pauline's department now, a young woman just out of Mohawk College, 22, overwhelmed in the way of someone who is extremely competent and doesn't know it yet. On her 3rd day, I brought 2 coffees up from the lobby. I sat with her through the intake system for an hour, walking her through the cross-reference logic slowly. When I left, she looked at me the way people look when something has been given to them that they weren't expecting. "Thank you," she said. "Honestly, thank you." I told her it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing, and we both knew it. Small kindnesses are not small. I know that now more completely than I've ever known anything. I know it because I offered a thermos of coffee and honest conversation to a man sitting alone at a front desk on cold winter nights, and he felt seen enough by it to pay attention, and because he paid attention, he noticed the things that mattered before they could become the things that couldn't be undone. You never know what you're starting when you choose to see someone. You never know what chain of small, careful decisions you're setting in motion when you simply treat another person like they're worth talking to. Whoever is listening to this, be generous with your attention. Be generous with the ordinary gestures. Bring the extra coffee. Ask how someone's shift is going. Notice the person in the room who is doing their job quietly and well and expecting nothing back for it. You don't know what they're carrying. You don't know what they're watching over. You don't know when your small moment of decency will be the thing that makes them feel that someone in this world is worth protecting. It might be the most important thing you do all year. It might save your life.